Twitter CEO Elon Musk is sticking with his relabeling frenzy, and this time he has made the Canadians upset. Hard to do.
Canada on strike. Hey?
The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation has announced a break from Twitter after Musk added the government-funded label to the platform's account. The CBC said, "Our journalism is impartial and independent. To suggest otherwise is untrue. That's why we are pausing our activities on Twitter." Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau hit out at the change, arguing it was inaccurate because the CBC is, quote, only 70% government funded, supplying 30% of their funding from other revenue sources.
Elon Musk responded to the complaint with just trying to be accurate. Would they be okay if we said 70% government funded? In response on Twitter, users said 69%, give them the benefit of the doubt. Musk replied, good point. Generosity is always the right move. 69% it is. Probably that's more joking from him. The CBC now has the 69% government funded label. The CBC's decision to pause Twitter activity comes after certain U.S. outlets such as NPR and PBS have announced their exits from the platform. So actually I'm checking, and I don't see it anymore.
Did he take it down?
CBC, oh no, CBC, no, it's here. CBC says 69% government-funded media. CBC Radio Canada doesn't say that. So some of the accounts do, some of them don't.
So look.
Great.
You know, whatever you think of Elon Musk's humor and whether or not it's appropriate for the CEO of multi-billion-dollar companies to be making 69 jokes on his app and subjecting institutions that have substantive concerns, whether or not you think that they're in the right, substantive concerns about how they're being labeled and treated on the app, it's difficult. I'm sorry. It's just difficult to get past it. This is the level of discourse we're in. But trying to put his jokes to the side and what's going on, I do think it's a little bizarre for CBC to take issue with being labeled as government funded when they're overwhelmingly government funded.
Yeah. It's difference between government funded and state affiliated. I understand why this is state affiliated. Right. Well, and I don't quite know the case with CBC. Like we've discussed, some of these non-American media companies do have a certain level of government oversight and input that is actually not true of NPR, our partly government-funded outlet. I think it was wrong to call NPR state-affiliated. I think it reinforces the views of kind of progressives in the state in the same way that basically every other progressive media organization does, independent of its funding. But government funding is different because that's true, and it's especially and overwhelmingly true of the CBC. So when we're talking, boo-hoo, cry more. I mean,
well, when we're talking about NPR, we're really talking about anywhere between 1% and 10% of funding. 1% officially, and then there's some more that comes through funding of kind of regional stations that comes back to NPR. So whatever the number is, it's overwhelmingly the minority of NPR's funding. Nathan Robinson has been making this point over at Current Affairs, and I tend to agree with him. People who are on the left, people who are progressive or left-leaning at all, shouldn't be arguing against government funding and contributing to this narrative that government funding necessarily means a kind of corruption and influence. Of course, that can happen, just like there can be corporate corruption and influence. But the issue here is whether or not there is actually a legitimate claim of inappropriate sway over the content, and whether it is actually there are sufficient Chinese walls, and et cetera, up that they can report the news in a way that's unbiased and unaffected by who is paying them. I happen to be of the view, and I think it's substantiated, that government funding has much less of an influence on your output than being owned by a billionaire like Jeff Bezos, for instance. But instead of making that case and defending the value of government funding, all these institutions that definitely should know better and who at other points in their lives brag about being government funded as a way to try to get donations from the public are saying, no, it's offensive for you to attribute that label to me?
And are these people always obsessed with the idea of disclosure and transparency overall? Anyway, like let's say a more edgy, I guess, left-wing wealthy person had taken over Twitter and had started, labeling, Murdoch funded or Mercer's funded or Koch funded or something to conservative, to right of center organizations. I doubt there would have been a lot of tears shed that, oh no, you're hurting the feelings of these companies by left-wing people, right?
And maybe that would be a better world, including Soros-funded or whatever else. Yeah. Maybe that would be actually a better world for us to live in.
Well, and Soros-funded, and the progressives flipped their lids over the Soros-funded accusations about the judge. I had to do a whole radar on that. Like, okay, Soros gave money to an organization that gave money to Bragg, like in swift succession, but there was a whole fact check that the Washington Post did, and MSNBC keeps bringing it up that it was wrong to say that this is a smear. It's anti-Semitic.
Right.
They said it's anti-Semitic to acknowledge this. I mean, what is the logic and the standards
there
here?
Really is
this is not fair.
So I do think that the one legitimate case that CBC and NPR and others have is the kind of inconsistency of the labeling. And this is where I think Elon Musk's kind of puerile humor gets in his own way. If you're out here making jokes about 69ing on Twitter, people are not going to have confidence that you're making decisions based on a genuine desire to have transparency on media accounts versus a personal vendetta to basically attack more left-leaning media that you perceive to be biased against you. And so in the same way that I think sites like Russia Today were very frustrated that they seem to be singled out in the days and weeks after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and hit with labels that were not also attributed to other accounts that have, I would argue, a too close a relationship with their state actors behind them. It was about signaling that Russia Today was a uniquely inaccurate source of news. I think that similarly, NPR and these other accounts are concerned that there's an effort to stigmatize them in that way. And that if Elon Musk actually were even-handedly making it clear where everybody got their funding, I think that would actually be a benefit to Twitter, quite honestly. But he's not doing that. Instead, he seems to be taking obvious joy out of irritating certain accounts that he feels like aren't politically aligned with him.
Well, the CBC tweeted Twitter's own policy defines government-funded media as cases where the government may have varying degrees of government involvement over editorial content, which is clearly not the case with CBC Radio Canada. But again, this is the state affiliation versus government funding distinction. CBC Radio Canada is publicly funded through a parliamentary appropriation that is voted upon by all members of Parliament. Its editorial independence is protected in law in the Broadcasting Act, as we said in our statement from last week.
Now, journalist Glenn Greenwald tweeted, "It's just a simple fact that the CBC gets Canadian government funding. If they're embarrassed by it, they should reject it. Google has placed similar labels on BBC, NPR, and CBC on their YouTube channels, but they're afraid to complain to Google the way they do to Twitter." And he went on to share screenshots of NPR and CBC headlines. Yeah, I think
that's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't realize that about the YouTube content.
Absolutely take the point of being afraid to
beef with Google?
Yes, to talk with YouTube too sternly.
I mean, I do think there's something to that. Google is very powerful. I also do think that part of
Not that we haven't, by the way. We've objected to many of their moderation decisions. Read this show and others, and we've complained about them, and I've found them difficult to work with. But it's not, I think, just that Google is powerful. It's that Elon Musk also has made himself available in this way. Elon Musk is, I think, a little bit trying to have it both ways, where he's a character on a website that engages with individual accounts and makes jokes and, does high school style graffiti on the CBC's Twitter page. Changes the Twitter logo to a Shiba Inu, like his dog, for jokes, and says in an interview that there's a new CEO of Twitter. Doesn't actually answer a good question that the BBC journalist asked about who was going to replace him. He said he was going to step down as CEO, and instead says, "Oh, it's going to be my dog." Look, you can't be that kind of a character and make yourself so approachable and accessible on the app, and then be upset that people are trying to reach you on the app and address you on the app in that same way. Especially when, if you go through official channels, you're going to get hit with a response of a poop emoji. Yeah, I'm looking on YouTube. When you go to a video by the CBC, it does say under the video, CBC Radio Canada is a Canadian public broadcast service, and there's a Wikipedia link to their Wikipedia page. It doesn't do that for The Hill.
I will also say that there is this, this is straight Noam Chomsky and manufacturing consent. Part, I think what bristles here is that I think a lot of folks, especially on the left, would absolutely acknowledge the nefarious influence of state actors on all kinds of media enterprises that are not actually state affiliated, that don't receive technical funding in an official way.
No, that's the Twitter files.
The whole point of the Twitter files, exactly, was that this is going on. And I think there is a little bit of a bristling, and I understand this from the perspective of a BBC or NPR, the idea that because they officially take government money, they get a branding. When a corporate station like MSNBC or even Fox that might hold a party line when it comes to foreign policy issues, who don't want to report on the content, for example, of these leaked Ukrainian war documents, are not under some kind of influence simply because they don't have a direct money payment funding model.
I mean, the heads of Facebook, Twitter, Google, Amazon, Apple, they're routinely called before Congress, and then political figures say, do this, or we're going to punish you regulation-wise. I mean, that is the big concern. And they're doing that publicly. That's wrong. And then behind the scenes, their agents are messaging, communicating with these companies, and demanding also censorship. So that is even if you get around it's more a philosophical objection I have. My practical issues with government ability to control the narrative is not at all confined to the state-affiliated or government-funded news outlets. More Rising right after this.